Hello everyone, most welcome to Uppsala Art Museum and this panel talk and the finissage of this exhibition by Alvaro Campo, artist who's sitting here amongst us. We have had this show for a couple of months now. We opened in the end of June, and now it's the closing weekend, and it's also time to wrap up and talk about the different subjects in the exhibition, and also to reconnect to these wonderful researchers that we have here for this panel talk. Because in June, when we installed the show, we also did interviews with each of you, and now we would like to bring you all together here with Alvaro and to talk about different topics in the show, basically. So Alvaro, you're an artist based in photography and video art mainly, but also working very much with the public sphere nowadays. Yeah. And maybe you just can give us a short introduction of the idea with this show, Time Observatory.
Well, yes, I can say that I've been working. I worked for a while with the idea of space, but then I realized that maybe it would be interesting to go into try to understand and to really try to understand what time is about, because it feels like it's an important factor in our everyday lives, that time affects us very much, and that we're in a way speeding up, and I sort of wonder what it might be due to, and how trying to understand this, because not everything is speeding up. Societies are speeding up, but the Earth is still spinning around the sun and at the same speed. So what is this speed about, and how could we, or could I, try to better understand it? That's the idea, the central idea of the exhibition. It's like an experiment and an investigation in time and with time.
Yeah, and you do it throughout observations. I mean, you spend a lot of time in nature and document it by photograph or video. But also we have this installation in the courtyard next to the Uppsala Art Museum called 8 Automated Rainbows and the Progress of Flowers, and it's an installation that had been evolving throughout the summer, and it consists of 8 pallets with plants growing, but also this system with rainbows. Maybe you can tell us briefly.
Yeah, well, it's I think rainbows are something that we know are something. If we explain it through science, it's demystify it. It's a very common and banal phenomenon, but still, it seems like humans, we all have a fascination with them. Think that there's some kind of natural beauty that catches people's attention, and I think that's also something that's very interesting. That if we can explain things, certain things keep their mystery, and the rainbow is one of them. So one of the idea of this installation is to create rainbows, to be able to see them, to just go up to the courtyard and see rainbows. That's one thing.
And to use technology.
To use technology
of
course, to see, to create them, and then to automate them in a way that we automate processes in our society, in production lines or whatever, like the same when you go to the supermarket and have a robot, and that is that you are interacting with instead of a human being. So these exchanges are it's interesting to me that we are automating things, and I thought, okay, maybe we can automate rainbows then. And so that's why the title, 8 Automated Rainbows. And then we have the progress of flowers, because flowers' progress is a time that is very slow in a way, and that you have to pay attention to it if you want to notice something. And progress usually is not a word that we use in this context. It's of course used in another context. So that's a little bit a summary of that exhibition.
Yeah, we could come back to this work later maybe. So so now I would like to introduce Erik Stempels, and you're a researcher at the Department of Physics and Astronomy at the Uppsala University, at Ångström Laboratoriet here in town. And we met you at the old observatory, and a beautiful place really. And you explained to us very much about your role as a researcher and this very long millions of years that you're working with in your research to understand us, but also how time also is governing us, and this relationship between planetary movements and us as biological creatures. So maybe you can tell us a bit about how this research affects also your idea of us as humans.
Yes, I understand the question. Humans are, in that sense, very small. If you do astronomy like I do, then there are so many things that are far away, and the timescales are very long, and then we try to catch a lot of information in our, say, human time span, be it in the night, or maybe over a few nights of observations, measurements, or maybe over lifetimes, or perhaps a few hundred years. And this is of course very short compared to the rest of the universe. So then the universe looks as static to us at this moment. And at the same time you then discover that there are all these things, that the stars are moving, that the constellations we see today are not the same as what they used to be. So it's very common in astronomy to be facing this contradiction, that you have this static situation that in fact is not static, because all the processes are taking so much time. And then at the same time there are some processes that do go very fast, like the sun that we can see rise and set every day because the Earth rotates, and that then gives the heartbeat to our daily lives, and we even adjust our clocks, our own measurements of time to these phenomena. For example, the Earth is not rotating with the constant speed. It's very slowly rotating at a slower speed, so it's slowing down. And this is the reason we have to add some additional leap seconds every few years. So what we do then is we suddenly adjust our own measurement of time to reflect the fact that some astronomical or mechanical phenomenon is taking place. So we're very much a subject to time as well.
Yeah. And it's been a summer when we also have noticed, of course, each summer the change of daylight, and throughout these months there's quite a big change when it's getting darker nowadays, and in August. And Marie Kvarnström, you're a researcher in biodiversity, and been engaged at SLU for many years, and now you're writing on a book. And you're also very interested in this, how people in earlier on, before the industrial society, was affected by 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 the planetary movements and this how the daily rhythm was sort of in tune with these movements.
Yes.
Yeah.
And of course, we still are deeply affected, totally affected every moment of our lives by these planetary movements. But we are not as aware, I think. It's not woven into the fabric of our very beings the way it was when my great-great-grandparents were alive, because then they had only that reality, and now we have put so many other layers on top, so and that obstruct the view, as it were, of the foundations of the planetary foundations of our lives. And that is very, very interesting to me, how very different lives were, and particularly the concept of light and darkness, and how my great-great-grandparents had only the open fire. That was the only light they had. And of course the winter then was something completely different from summer. And now we sit here inside with artificial lighting, and that is something we are completely used to. We don't even question it or think about it normally.
Yeah. And also you told the story about your ancestors walking from Mora in Dalarna to Stockholm to work.
Yes.
And it took a week, maybe, I don't know.
It took about a week
Yeah.
to walk from Vinäs outside Mora to Stockholm.
Yeah.
And they actually walked. They had also vacation holidays in around midsummer. So, or just after midsummer, they walked back to be part of the hay harvesting. And then they walked down to Stockholm again to continue, or Uppsala. Uppsala people were the most difficult, they said. Stockholm was a bit easier.
Okay.
So they walked back to work, and then they came home again, maybe September, October, November, depending on their situation.
Yeah. Because speed is one of the one of the issues really of the society of today, that we're so used to speed and this the ability to get information quick and to move around the world very quickly, and this spring we've been in quite a different situation also because of the pandemic situation, and that's also something that we've sort of involved in the exhibition as one of the themes, sort of, with Erik Hallstensson, who's not here also, philosopher, discussing this. But I was also reading this article this summer also that we really need to get used to not take the flight very quickly, to be able to move quickly because of the climate change, and that's something that you're engaged with, Marie Kvarnström, in your research, but also Isak Stoddard, you're more into this very what can we say? Well, you're looking at the statistics and making all different calculations of the situation, how different scenarios are, so to say. And you're a PhD student at the Department of Earth Sciences and Natural Resources and Sustainable Development at the Uppsala University. So when we met you for the last interview, you also just had this report published about the Swedish commitments to the 2% degrees report, and you talked about this different times of experiencing time, also in relation to your research about the kairos and the chronos. So maybe you can tell us a bit about this.
Yes.
Yeah, sure. What strikes me now that I listen to Marie and Eric and Alvaro speak about their work and in relationship to time is how it somehow brings out very existential, sort of deeply meaningful questions about who we are and what the world is in some sense. And also what strikes me is that time, in whatever sense we relate to it or measure it or think about it, it is in a sense relational. And the way that we tend to relate time to our experience, perhaps the way I relate to time often in my own research is through space, which you talked about also, which was a previous interest of yours. So there's a very close, I think, relationship between how we think about time, how we conceive time. In some ways, there's a strong relationship to how we relate to the world in its three-dimensional sort of spatial dynamics, and also in terms of space. You know, the space out there that we're actually very affected by, as Eric pointed out just now, the movements of the stars and the planets, and perhaps also the expansion of the universe. But then there's also another aspect of time, which I guess is much more vernacular or sort of on a very practical level, which I guess is something that you've sort of explored a lot, Marie. Also, this idea of how our daily practices and our daily lives conjure up other experiences of time. So I guess what I was sort of talking about in my interview was this tension between what I do in my research and how I experience time in other ways when I'm not doing my research on sort of the very urgent situation that we find ourselves when it comes to climate change. And I think there's an important tension here that also matters, and it will also affect how we as individuals and how we as societies respond to the predicament that we find ourselves in. And that's of course related to climate change, but also other ecological issues and societal sort of civilizational issues.
Yeah, because the crucial thing is the difficulty for us to also, imagine the future really, and to see us within 10 years or 50 years or 100 years, and so that's like the thing that we're struggling with really when it comes to climate change research, isn't it?
Yeah. Since we're in the art museum, I don't know why it comes into my mind now, but there's a painting, speaking of sort of the fundamental questions that are sort of driving our research or our artwork. I guess there's always questions beyond the questions some ways. So we could say that, I'm interested in climate change because I want to make sure that the emissions go down very rapidly and that, humans and species don't end up dying, and there's a lot of suffering as a consequence of that. So that's one of the reasons I'm engaging in the type of research I'm engaged in. But below that, there's other questions, and you can dig deeper and deeper. And I think this is interesting. And since we're in the art museum, this painting of Paul Gauguin, the French painter, comes to mind, where I think he's scribbled in the upper left-hand corner 3 questions. Which, when I heard this just the other week, it sort of struck me that these are questions that I'm also grappling with in my research, but they're sort of much on a deeper level than sort of what's apparent when I'm, judging Sweden's, climate politics and if they're in line with international agreements or not. And the 3 questions that he scribbled in this painting was, I think, something like, where do we come from? So the question of origin, who are we? Or what are we, and where are we going? So that's sort of the future oriented. And in these questions, there's of course it's a very temporal sort of temporal questions, but also the middle question I think is interesting. What are we, or who are we? Which I think perhaps we can relate to in our research, but we can also relate to it in our experience of being humans.
Yeah, Alvaro, is this something that you also
Yeah,
connect
absolutely.
to with
I connect deeply to that. I mean, it's also I've been also reflecting because of all these. As I say, my practice is about learning and trying to understand things better, and I do it with art. And one of the things that I heard a lot. When that is common in many of the interviews, it's the idea of time, more than time as rhythm, as we find it in nature. Maybe defining time as rhythm, the rhythms of things of evolving. If we're going to try to try to understand it, and as you were saying also in. Eric, in your that we're sort of biological beings that are and have been created or evolved, not created, evolved to live in this kind of defined by this what should we say, environment. The planet, the light, we sleep at night, we wake up and work during the days and so on. It defines enormously who we are as beings, as biological beings. But then there's also something else that has happened during our evolution as a society, is that technology has come in and allowed us to sort of evolve technologically, and technology evolves itself in a way, and we've also aligned to that evolution, maybe our minds. So what I've a little bit thought about it, could it be that our minds are aligning to a technological evolution, but our bodies are still aligned to sort of natural rhythms in a way? And so if that would be, I mean, that's a way of trying to sort of understand what has happened and how we can, where are we going to go from here in a way. Sort of, these are some of the reflections I've had during the summer from hearing all of you.
Yeah, I completely agree. And what you say about the time is, we can describe time in terms of rhythm, and what you said, Isaac, we can describe time in terms of relations. So you can say time is relations and rhythm. That's what it is. And changing relations. I mean, moving objects and subjects. And what you say about our lives, our bodies still being, we are evolutionary beings, and we have evolved on a planet in relations with everything around us, being part of everything around us. And now, through fossil fuel and through technological change, we have, in a way, we have believed that, or society has believed that we can free ourselves from these planetary boundaries. And now we see, of course, that it's leading us to complete disaster, and we have to act very quickly. And if we look, Isaac, if we look at the speed of change, we need to the speed at which we need to change, it's tremendous, and we actually need to decrease our use of fossil fuel much more rapid than what has happened through the coronavirus spread. And the coronavirus changed our entire society, and we now think we need to go back to normal. But what was before was not at all normal, was totally abnormal. And we have to find the way forward to something completely different from what we have ever experienced, any of us, in our lives, because what we have experienced before doesn't work.
Yeah, it's in some sense it's a situation, of course, that we've never found ourselves in before. But that's true for every time. In some sense, it's just that this particular time seems to me, going back to kairos and chronos, the sort of the Greek conceptualizations or ideas about time, is that it does feel like a time where there are it's a critical time, and that has also been true in the past. But in a sense, this is a time when these different time scales seem to, in different ways, completely coexist in some ways. I mean, one example would be that we have, the geological timescales that are becoming apparent with the sort of the amount of time that it takes to produce such a thing as fossil fuels, and if you compare that to the amount of time we spend burning it, of course, that's what disrupts the climate, is this difference in time, in temporalities. But then there's also the sort of the technologically driven, nanosecond economy that we're immersed in. That's also very hard for us to sort of relate to, and it's even driven now mostly by algorithms that, of course, are human creations. But that's a very different temporality that's also coexisting with this. And then at the same time, we're still, as Eric points out, we're still governed to a very large extent, I guess, or at least in relation to the stars, to the planets and their movements in the sort of astronomical time scales so all these are sort of layered upon each other, and I think that creates both anxiety, perhaps, but also it's interesting, if nothing else, even though it's in some ways it's a very existentially challenging time to live in. So yeah, but exactly the time, the speed at which we would need to transition to live up to the agreements or the commitments that we made in international treaties like the Paris Agreement is very hard to grasp, I think, and it does pose very challenging questions to the way in which societies are organized. So.
And it's completely, totally necessary for us to grasp it, although it's very hard.
6 to 8 years is the amount that we have for if we continue as we do now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm now that we're speaking about it, I'm beginning to question the sort of results of my own research. It's not that that's not true, but the feeling that we get when we hear such a thing, like we have 6 to 8 years left. And of course, science isn't saying that then nothing happens after that. I mean, it's just that there's consequences if so. The 6 to 8 years is our interpretation of what the Paris Agreement means, and combining that political commitment with what the science says, how much more emissions we can have of carbon dioxide before we cross a certain temperature threshold, which we've agreed to politically. So putting those together, putting the science together and the political agreements together, gives such results. And I think for me that is more, at least the way I see it, is a sort of wedge into our perhaps imagination of what's at stake in a sense, and where we are at. But it's not the kind of temporality or perhaps way of thinking about time that is the most constructive when we then think about, well, what do we do about that, or where are we going? So we need that sort of perhaps sense of urgency in some sense, but I've seen, and I see over and over again, that the sort of the psychological, but also the sort of societal well, first of all, societies haven't really, must be honest, they haven't responded to that wedge. So it's just kind of puttering on as normal. And as you said, Marie, also, we're sort of longing, and perhaps for good reasons also, to come back to the normal. But of course, the normal is something that has been normalized. Yeah. It's not something that is perhaps normal. It's just something that we think of as normal. So we need that sort of, I think, that sense of urgency, but then we need to have other ways of relating to that predicament. And then I think we need to relate to other things. And perhaps not only, I think we can, for me, I when I look up at the stars ever since I was a child, that is sort of breathtaking, and it gives me sort of, a sense of awe in some sense, and also a sense of sort of standing at the sort of edge of something. And I think, so I think it's, for me, that's been very important. I think it's been important for human societies, but we also need to relate to other things like the plants out on the courtyard here, and think about, the way in which perhaps plants experience time, or the way in which other animals experience time, and that's the work that you do, I guess, Marie, as well. Also, the more than human world.
Yes.
But I don't wonder, do we then have we then lost our sense of time? Because it's easy to define time in terms of, say, what we the daily cycle of the sun. That's very easy to do, and it's not necessarily how we then live with time. And a lot of people don't know what is going on the heavens because it's not important for them. But then at the same time, yes, we are made as to fit these patterns. That's what we are as biological beings. But then people can get stressed because they have nothing to do nowadays, which is very strange. Because I don't have the immediate access. I cannot have things happen on my own time scale, what I want, and they're frustrated by that, which somehow also reflects that we are very far away from what is maybe the normal, is to live in tune with, say, nature or the processes around us, and that going back to the normal is maybe not at all the normal, because it's a complete construct in that sense. But it's very strange that one can be stressed by not having anything to do, because that's not how we're supposed to be as beings.
And that's also something that has been very striking, I think, spending time with you, Alvaro, in this show and with the work of yours. This presence, sort of in the moment, that you also always are working with in the different pieces. And
yeah, I guess a lot of the work, my work, has to do with paying attention to things that we take for granted, because, as you say, things have been normalized, and what we take for being normal and take for granted are actually, when we think about just the fact that we are here on this planet, living and conscious of our own existence in the middle of the universe, is absolutely mind-blowing. But at the same time, we take it as the normal situation, and day to day I'll just watch TV or turn on soap opera or whatever it is, without noticing this incredible fact that we're here. And one of the things that, by paying attention to the rhythms of nature, maybe nature I call it because of the I find that I'll define it that way, because we have this human time and we have this maybe non-human time, I could say instead. Non-human time, that how do animals experience time? They don't ask themselves what should they do. They are just in a constant flux in relation to this gigantic system, in a way. And perhaps if we were to get in contact again with the way that we that animals experience time, perhaps we would come back in contact with our own habitat, because it seems that animals have a relation to their habitat, and if we say that the earth is our habitat, we have in a way losing contact with it. And could it have to do with time, or how we experience time, how our minds have been conditioned to experience time in relation to our societies and technology, has affected this loss of contact with the habitat? In a way, I mean, these are things I think about when I work.
When I study the lives of my great-grandparents, I think they were never bored. They never sat down and felt, I have nothing to do. And I think they were much more than we are. They were in that flow of life, the flow of life in order to keep alive. They were always slowly but steadily doing something meaningful. And I think that is something that many of us a lot of the time that we have lost and we can regain if we become conscious of it. That whatever they did was very meaningful and necessary for them to stay alive. And nowadays we can sit and have nothing to do, and who am I, and what am I, where am I going? We are at a loss. So, but I think, yeah.
So, Isak, would you like to say something?
Yeah, just Alvaro's comment here, and then Marie's comment sparked a thought. And I guess just to remind us that we are animals as well. That we are very sort of peculiar animals that can play beautiful music. We can look at the stars, understand perhaps where we're coming from and where we're going. Maybe not where we're going. But we are animals, and we are also, in a sense, nature. So I guess it just strikes me that listening to nature, or sort of being in relation to nature, is also, in a sense, being in a relationship to ourselves and listening to what's happening inside of us, which is also a part of nature. So I guess there's no sort of clear distinction between nature out there and nature in here. And that's one of the things that I think is important to grapple with.
Yeah, and in that sense, we're also animals who have created this very high technological society that we're dependent on. And I mean, as for example, you, Erik, as an astronomer, you're working with very advanced technology, and this is also, I mean, how can we sort of use the society that we have in a way that also is productive for the Earth? That's really the big task, isn't it?
But I think that goes back to the fundamental way we look at things, because we are living in a very deterministic society where we say we want to measure something, want something to have a value, want something to happen, etc. Where it all then comes back to something extremely fundamental to time, is that time has a direction. Something that is hot will cool down, and we cannot do anything about it. Although, on the other hand, we would like to have things like the way they are. That's why we have the microwave, because we want to have things hot now. So we don't accept this fact that there is an evolution in time. And this is something that is a property of time that we cannot come away from, which is a very fundamental physical property. But because we don't accept that has all these strange consequences. For example, that in our society we don't talk about passing of life. Death is not here. We have it compartmentalized into some institute where we treat this single moment as being as an item rather than something that is part of what I am now as a start. And this is it's very much a way that we look at things and try somehow to deny the fundamental physical flow of time.
Thanks, everyone. Now time is finished for yeah, it's running out, and it's such a wonderful occasion to sit here with you and to listen to your thoughts. And of course, it's a big topic that can go on for a long time and must go on. And the show is on for one more day, actually. So Sunday, the 16th of August, is the closing day of the show Time Observatory. So please come here and also check the other interviews with you free, and also Erik Hallstensson that's on YouTube at the Uppsala Art Museum. So thank you, everyone.